Hello. Wow, it's been over a year since I've made a video. Hi everyone, this is Albert, pronouns he, him, his, and I'm back with another video for Raising Souls page. So I had a lot of things that happened since the last video, so I guess I could give a quick life update, and then we can go on from there. So, for those who don't know, I recently graduated with my Master of Social Work, this past May. So I'm happy about that. I'm glad I don't have to worry about school right now. So that kind of got me out of the rhythm of leisure reading, and that can be hard just to get back into the rhythm of a routine that you've been doing. And I think this is the longest break I've really had from my readings. So we are back, and I feel like it was perfect to just go back into doing James Baldwin again since I just did Giovanni's Room. So for this video, we're doing Go Tell It on the Mountain. And for some backstory on Go Tell It on the Mountain, this is Baldwin's very first novel. And a brief synopsis, it's a semi-autobiographical novel about his upbringing, and it, it he uses a lot of his own experiences for this book, but it mostly focuses on three characters, but it all wraps around into, I would say, a back let's say I wouldn't say a background character, but it pretty much is about, it's pretty much like an ensemble piece. So I guess we can just get into the story to just get into like the breakdown and like how it goes. So the first there are three parts, and the second part is the longest one because it has like three semi parts to it. So the first part starts off with introducing us to the Grimes family. And the Grimes family were preparing for church. And the Grimes family, they're a family in Harlem. And for those who know about James Baldwin, he grew up in Harlem, and he also was a preacher. So I already knew that backstory about Baldwin is that he was a young teenage preacher. So that's how he got into his work, and that's kind of how he got into his writing style. Like when you read his work, it sounds, you can like the rhythm and the cadence to it, it makes you think about someone preaching. So why I found it, I really appreciated his work because it's very familiar with me since I also grew up in the church. But he grew up Pentecostal, which is, I would say, probably a lot more rigorous than a Southern Baptist church, probably. But it definitely is something familiar to me when I was reading this book. So the Grimes family were preparing for church, and it pretty much talks about what it's like being in the black church, and what it's like being in the black church that is in the north, and what kind of business church folk be getting into. Like, you got your preacher, you got your ministers, you got all the church members, and you meet all types of different church members. You got the musicians, you got the other ministries, and everything of that sort. And what is interesting about this is that there's this Sunday school teacher who is also a pianist for the church, and I think this is the son of the pastor that was, he's either like a son or a nephew of the pastor. I'm trying to remember, but his name is brother Elisha. I don't know if it's Elisha or Elisha. I just think Elisha because I remember hearing like Elijah and Elisha for some reason, and then I thought Elisha for some reason. So John is the main you could say the main character of this entire story. John is a 14-year-old boy who grew up in this environment, and he has this fondness for Elisha, which kind of insinuates there's some romantic sexual feelings towards Elisha. Like, he's impressed by how knowledgeable Elisha is, how talented he is. He even talked about the way he was dancing. Let me see if I can find the page where he was talking about Elisha dancing. Yeah, he was a dancer, a pianist, and a Sunday school teacher. So he's like impressed on like how talented Elisha is. So he got this infatuation over him. Let me see. And I think what was interesting is that yes, Father James was the name of the pastor who I'm trying to like. So the thing about me when it comes to like fiction is that I find it hard to like imagine what's going on in a fictional story. So, but I could just use my imagination, which is interesting about fiction works because I'm mostly into memoirs. But what's interesting is that the pastor, Father James, called Elisha and this girl Ella May out in front of the church and said like there was sin among them and stuff like that. So it's like, oh, we're already getting dramatic in this story, calling out sinner, and it's a Sunday school teacher. So I found that to be pretty interesting about how this story had this story unfolded. So Elisha, I guess not the saintiest of saints is what you say. Um, and then John, he was masturbating in the church bathroom. And John, I was kind of say a people pleaser. So you can see like he's this person that's doing everything he's supposed to be doing. Like he's very passive, very trying to do the right thing, but but because of his feelings towards Elisha, and we know about the church when it comes to sexuality, that's not really something that is really explored in the institution. So John found an outlet in the church bathroom, and and he ejaculated. And this is all before his 14th birthday, which is like, that's like the age where you're like exploring your things. You're going through puberty. You're getting through intense feelings about people, and it's like an age of accountability. You actually are like getting a spoonful of what the real world is, even though you're still young. You still you still go to school and stuff like that. And John was also very popular in school. He was the star student. He gets straight A's, I think honor roll and all that stuff, which, knowing how James Baldwin is, of course he's the like most profound intellectuals in the world. So even with that, he also goes into some issues with his father, who, if another thing I know about James Baldwin is that he was raised by his stepfather, so I assume this was the stepfather that raised him. So, and his stepfather was a deacon, so that shows that parallel. And his father is like, oh my gosh, he was a mess. And the stepfather's name is Gabriel. So Gabriel, I think he literally called John to his face that he's Satan. Like he's literally like, that's like a Pentecostal household. That is, that's a lot, and I can only imagine like that kind of trauma that goes into John, and knowing James Baldwin, and and he's openly gay, and he was a preacher back then too. So, and knowing the kind of things that was said back then, I know it was ugly when it came to the homophobia. Um, and then John has a younger brother named Roy, and Roy confronts their mother about their feelings about their father. So the father is not only abusive towards John, but also abusive to Roy. So Roy went to their mother, and their mom is kind of like the passive parent. Like, your father did all he can do. He was the one putting the food on the table, helping paying the bills, helping make sure we get food, making sure everything runs in the house. And she thinks that the children should be grateful and everything of that sort. So, it's that authoritarian parenting where only the parents have a say. But it seems like in the patriarchal sense, meaning the man is the only one that has the say in the household. Not even the mother really has that much authority. Guarantee. And take into consideration, this book took place in the late 30s, early 40s. So women didn't have that much autonomy. The only way a woman can have a bank account is if they get married. So, and that creates a lot of power dynamics. And they went on and she went on to tell them that they should go ahead and do their chores. And another thing is that it's John's birthday. No one really like told him happy birthday or something like that, not even his parents. So he was like, okay, is anyone gonna recognize me? Like, I'm a teenager now, pretty much. And John was going through some family photographs, and then he saw photos of his grandparents, his biological father, some of Gabriel's family, because Gabriel had a family before John, Roy, and his mom came in the picture, and his mom's name is Elizabeth. And he saw a picture of this deceased woman who knew his father, which can insinuate that's the woman that his father was in a relationship with before his mom, Elizabeth. So he always has this resentment towards his dad, because he's the one that pushes them to be the perfect family. And he always has to abide by his rules. And he really feels like he never really get to live a life. He never really get to relax, never really get to be a child. He always has to follow these rules and stuff like that. So next thing you know, his mom did give him some money for his birthday. So his mom seems to be the more empathetic person in the household. So he's the one that he gets to at least be heard in the house. He went around to she said that he can do whatever he wants to do with the money. So he eventually went out to go see a movie. And he went to go see a movie in a white area. And then he saw a movie with a female antagonist that was punished and put in a dark room to meet her maker. And he identified so much with this female antagonist, and he's starting to think this might be his fate. So he's in a dark room with her maker, which could imply, hell. And he's starting to, I guess, go into a state of depression, like, okay, this is my life, because like he really identified with this female antagonist, and this was her fate. Like there was no redemption arc or anything like that. She's just one dimensional. So once he got back home, he realized that Roy was got into trouble. Roy was kind of the more rebellious child. So he went on and got into some argument with some boys in the neighborhood, and then he got stabbed. So the parents helped him recover, and dad was in the his dad their dad was arguing with their aunt Florence, who also was also in the household. So let me see where I can go. And it got into a very heated argument between their dad and their aunt Florence. And let me see. I can get to it was on page 44. Yeah, his father was saying as John came back into the room, I'm sure going to be having some questions to ask you in a minute, old lady, referring to his Aunt Florence. I'm going to be wanting to know just how come you let this boy go out and get half killed. And then Aunt Florence said, oh, no, you ain't. You ain't going to be starting none of that mess this evening. You know right doggone well that Roy don't never ask nobody if he can't do nothing. He just go right ahead and do like he pleases. Elizabeth is who is their mother. Elizabeth sure can't put no ball and chain on him. She put her hands full right here in this house, and it ain't her fault if Roy got a head just as hard as his father's. And then it's like, okay, what did Gabriel do back in the day? Was he rough? Was he going rough like Roy? And then Gabriel said, "You got an awful lot to say. It looked like for once you could keep from putting your mouth in my business. It ain't my fault that you was born a fool. You always done been a fool. It ain't never going to change. I swear to my father, you tried the patience of Job. I done told you before," he said. He had not ceased working over the moaning Roy and was preparing now to dab the wound with iodine, "that I didn't want you coming in here and using that gutter language in front of my children. Don't you worry about my language, brother. You better start worrying about your life. What these children here ain't going to do them near as much harm as what they see. What they see is a poor man trying to serve the Lord. That's my life. Then I guarantee you that they're going to do their best to keep it from being their life. You mark my words." And that is like, okay, so there are some skeletons in Gabriel's closet as well, where it's like, it's interesting how the church is like, okay, they wag their finger on what you do, but they it's kind of hypocritical because it's like they got their dirt that they done too. So it's kind of implying that Gabriel has done some things he can't really critique anybody about because he was like the wrong messenger for all of that. So we get into that, and then Gabriel was projecting a lot of anger towards everyone, and it kind of shows like, okay, there was a generational curse that was going on in the family. Gabriel said here, "And for all the care you take of him, he might as well be dead. Don't look like you much care whether he lives or dies. Lord have mercy. He's my son, too. I carried him in my belly for 9 months, and I know him just like I know his daddy, and they just exactly alike. Now, you ain't got no right in the world to talk to me like that. I reckon you know all about a mother's love. I sure reckon on you telling me how a woman can sit in the house all day and let her own flesh and blood go out and get half butchered. Don't you tell me you don't know no way to stop him, because I remember my mother, God rest her soul, and she'd have found a way." And Aunt Florence said, "She was my mother too, and I recollect, if you don't, you being brought home many a time more dead than alive. She didn't find no way to stop you. She wore herself out beating on you, just like you've been wearing yourself out beating on this boy here. My, you got a lot to say. I ain't doing anything but trying to talk some sense into your big black hard head. You better stop trying to blame everything on Elizabeth and look to your own wrongdoings. Never mind, Florence. It's all over and done with now. I'm out of this house. Every day the Lord sends, working to put the food in these children's mouths. Don't you think I got a right to ask the mother of these children to look after them and see that they don't break their necks before I get back home?" So it's like, oh, you literally did the same thing that Roy has done, but you were worse. And here you are. Roy kind of did it better than you. So, and then after that got heated, Gabriel started beating on Roy, which is like, and then Elizabeth intervened, and then Gabriel hit Elizabeth. So, and then yeah, he slapped her and then whipped Roy, and then Aunt Florence and Elizabeth tried to stop him. And John was in fear. He was in, fight or flight mode. Like, he's seeing, like, his father hitting everyone in his family. So he told him that he wished he were dead and stuff like that. He wants to kill his father. And then we went into how how Gabriel is the deacon. So he's a respected member of the church, and you know how the church is also patriarchal. The men tend to be in those leadership positions, and they tend to be very well respected. There's no critique of them. They are called by God to spread the word and serve the church and stuff like that. So they have a degree of power. And John, after all that altercation, he just decided he needs to go to church. So because there is an evening service that's preparing, so he went to church. And then John encountered Elisha, and John and Elisha were cleaning the church together. And Elisha gave a lot of advice to John. And let me see if I can find where Elisha was giving some advice to John. Elisha said, "You got to remember that you think about it with a carnal mind. You still got Adam's mind, boy, and you keep thinking about your friends. You want to do what they do, and you want to go to the movies, and I bet you think about girls, don't you, Johnny? Sure you do. And you don't want to give up all that, but when the Lord saves you, he burns out all that old Adam. He gives you a new mind and a new heart, and then you don't find no pleasure in the world. You get all your joy in walking and talking with Jesus every day. People say it's hard, but let me tell you, it ain't as hard as living in this wicked world and all the sadness of the world where there ain't no pleasure no how, and then dying and going to hell. Ain't nothing as hard as that. You see how the devil tricks people into losing their souls?" John said yes. And Elisha said, "They got girls in the school I go to, and they nice girls, but their minds ain't on the Lord. And I try to tell them the time to repent ain't tomorrow, it's today." So even though there were some feelings towards Elisha, Elisha could be bisexual, but we have to remember this is late 30s, early 40s. People who are in the LGBTQ community aren't out, so they try to still abide by the social norms back in those days. And even though he kind of was like kind of tempting John, he lets him know like there's still some joys in life and stuff to live for. Like you're still like you just turned 14, like you still got a lot of life ahead of you. You better enjoy while you're young and stuff like that. And then some of the church ladies named Sister McCandless and Sister Price came to sing, and they talk about what was like. And then Elisha started playing the piano, so they got into a moment of worship and stuff like that. And that was the end of the first part. The second part is where we get into the backstories of Aunt Florence, Gabriel, and Elizabeth. So remember, Florence is John's aunt, Gabriel is John's stepfather, and Elizabeth is John's mother. So we pretty much get into the backstory of like how they came to be the people that they are in this story. And I'm gonna just summarize because it's a long book, I would say, because it's like over 200 pages, so I consider that long. But yeah, we get into Florence's backstory. We see that she learns to pray from her mom, which is John's grandmother, and I think her grandmother's name is Rachel, if I'm correct. And Florence has this neighbor named Deborah. Deborah was harassed by some white men occasionally. She was always been sexually harassed by these white men, and I think she was underage, so she's always been harassed by these white men and stuff like that. And we get into the dynamics of Florence, Gabriel, and their mom. So their mom favors Gabriel a lot more than Florence because she feels like Florence isn't going to get ahead in life because she's a woman. So we think about late 30s, early 40s. Imagine like I would say probably the 20s or something like that, where women, of course, don't have too many rights. So their mom always has this favoritism towards Gabriel. Like whenever he gets in trouble or something like that, he only gets like a slap in the wrist. He doesn't really get punished. But when Florence gets in trouble, her troubles are always amplified towards her. She like Florence is most likely not going to get educated. Like Gabriel is most likely going to get educated. He's most likely to be able to serve in the military or stuff like that. Like actually get the benefits from the government. And Florence one day when her mom was about to die, like she got really sick. She announced that she's going to go to New York because she's pretty much tired. And Florence also has been the one that has been caring for their mom while she was sick. And even that wasn't enough to like to give her to be a little more sympathetic towards Florence. And her mom was like going off like, oh, I'm on my deathbed and you gonna leave me like this? So it seems like she was expecting like Florence to just care for her and for Gabriel to just wander the world. Like he gets to have no limits to his capabilities, but Florence, she has to stay being the subservient person. And Gabriel also was like, you're also supposed to take care of mom. So Florence was like going off on both of them. Like she is tired. I would say Florence is probably the character where I feel so much for her, and I was proud that she feels like she has to go to another region, because I'm trying to remember what state they were before she went to New York, because she went said she was going to go to New York, even though she really doesn't know what else she was going to do. She just knows she needs to get out of that environment because it's very hostile, very toxic, very unhealthy, and she doesn't see herself becoming a better person staying in that, which that is some growth considering back in the day. Then Florence eventually met this man named Frank. She and Frank got married. Then with that, apparently that marriage didn't last too long because Frank was always drinking, and they even got into an argument of him being like a common Negro. Like he's always getting into trouble and stuff like that. So he's feel like, you're just a typical man. You're just like my brother, but you're but I think she has more grace for Frank because she knows how Gabriel is with his ways. He knows that Gabriel's behavior was enabled. She feel like she could fix Frank and stuff like that, but the alcohol got to him too bad. But there was a moment where he said that he'll eventually get better or something like that, and then I think he eventually enlisted in the military, and then he was in France, and I think that he relapsed in the alcohol, and then he eventually succumbed to it, and then he died. So Florence was widowed. But even then, while Florence was in New York, she still has been close with the neighbor Deborah. And we see that Deborah was complaining about Gabriel. So the deceased woman that Jim saw in the family photographs was Deborah. So Deborah and Gabriel, they got into a committed relationship, and they eventually got married. And then let me see, was there anything else that was significant that stood out to me in that part? Yeah, so she still kept in touch with Deborah, and she was complaining about Gabriel, and she's like, that daggone Gabriel. He's still in his ways. And the next semi part of part 2 is titled Gabriel's Prayer. So we got a lot of backstory on Gabriel. So Gabriel is, I would say, inspired by James Baldwin's stepfather. So I could see like a lot of sins of the father type of feelings on this. So Gabriel, I would say, after I think it was after the death of their mom, he was in a state of depression, and his faith was tested and stuff like that. Then he talked, and then I think Deborah was also in the funeral, and then he and Deborah got connected. She was the first woman that he had sex with, and then they eventually got married. And all of this is like sending a message to Gabriel that he somehow can be a preacher. And Deborah at one moment asked if he talked to Florence since she moved. And it's like, okay, a lot of time has passed by. You don't think you should check on your sister and see how she's been situated in New York? And he still has no feeling towards her. Yeah, Deborah said to him, I ain't heard from her lately. I don't believe she's so happy up there. And Gabriel said, here, and serve her right too. She ain't had no business going away from here like she did, just like a crazy woman. She tell you she married yet? So it's like, okay, the fact that she's not married, another way to denigrate her as in this patriarchal society. So it's like, you're not even worth talking to because you're not even married. And he's like, oh, of course, and stuff like that. But I'm trying to think, did he even know that she was married to Frank? So I'm trying to remember. Gabriel is starting to get into trying to become a preacher. So he was preaching his initial sermon about the prophet Isaiah in the Bible, and this was known as a 24 elders revival meeting. And this was like a special type of service that was going on in a local church that he's been doing his sermons for. And the congregation loved what he did on this in his sermon. He was very he got the house riled up, and he was, and then he got approved by the 24 Elders Council or something like that. So he impressed the council enough that he was invited to this luncheon or something like that. And then Deborah was also a big woman, so the 24 the council members were like teasing on Deborah's size, and Gabriel did not appreciate that. Like he like let them know like he is not here for that. um and it showed he kind of like loves Deborah. He's like starting to develop serious feelings for her. So he eventually proposed to Deborah. And next thing you know, here comes this woman named Esther, who I'm trying to remember how she got into the church, but she started visiting the church and stuff like that. And there was all these gossip about Esther. She started talking to Gabriel and started to get assimilated into the church, because she was like, I've done a lot of dirt, pastor, but I really see like this church can really help me out. And then the pastor, he was like trying to be a savior. What I've realized a lot about this book is about the theme of saviorship and stuff like that. It's like we really, and then when it comes to power dynamics and stuff like that, it's because when you're like being put in a position of power, there's these boundaries that you really need to push on people that try to possibly take advantage of that power, and you possibly exploiting that power. So that's what I got a lot from this book, and that's exactly what happened with Esther and Gabriel. So Gabriel and Esther had an extramarital affair, and it was for 9 days, apparently. Next thing you know, Esther told Gabriel that she's pregnant. And you trying to be in church, you a married man, this ain't a good look for him. And this is the Pentecostal church. They ain't gonna like that. That has to be put under the rug. And I'm sure reproductive rights and stuff like that back then isn't really something that is open even. So, and I think Esther really wanted to have a child, and she feels like this is probably the moment where I have a baby. And there was a lot of arguing on what to do. And here's the wild part. So Esther and Gabriel were talking about what to do about this situation. And then Gabriel remembered that Deborah has some money that she was saving up in case she and Gabriel have children. And then Gabriel got some money out of Deborah's money jar. I don't know if it's a piggy bank or a money jar or something like that. And he gave that money to Esther so she can go on and go somewhere else with that baby and not speak about it. So Gabriel is, y'all, I was reading this story like it's a soap opera. Like, if you want some, it reminds me of Giovanni's Room a lot. Like, James Baldwin knows how to write. Like, if he gets a job as a soap opera writer, it will be magic. So, and they got into like, another problem is that Deborah was never able to bear children. She had some fertility issues. So Gabriel just gave some of that money, and he's like, he probably don't. He's like, I won't even know if Deborah will even notice that I got some money. I'm like, Deborah, it's like, I'm sure Deborah knows every cent that's in that jar at piggy bank. So it's like, of course she would figure out somehow. And then Esther eventually died in wherever she was residing, and Esther's parents are still in that area where Gabriel and Deborah live. So Gabriel was informed by Esther's parents of her passing. And she was like, I don't even she gave birth. I think it was Illinois. It's either Illinois or Missouri where she gave birth. And her parents don't even know who impregnated her. So they were like, we don't know where this baby came from, but we still raised that baby like it was like if they were still, we didn't treat them no different if it was a baby in wedlock. So the baby's name was Royal, and it was interesting because we know that Jim has a younger brother named Roy. I was wondering if that's like something. So I was wondering whatever happened to Royal in the current story. And Royal was the name that Gabriel told Esther he always wanted to have a son named Royal. So Esther named the baby Royal. Because it's like, your wife ain't going to have a son, a child anytime soon. I might as well be the one to carry on your legacy. Like I said, this is a messy, this is the church mess that is so interesting in this book. And then, so they eventually had Esther's funeral at the church where Gabriel has been preaching at. And Deborah was wondering, she was also wondering about who the baby daddy of Esther's child is. So, and Gabriel was trying to play it, pretend like he has no idea who the daddy is, whoever the daddy is. It's a shame that he didn't step up. So it's like, wow. It's like James Baldwin's stepfather. This is really what he did, it's like, dang. It's like the nerve. So Deborah and Gabriel decided that they will be the ones to raise Royal. So he eventually did step up and try to raise Royal. And then Royal, he became 16 or something like that. I think he wanted to go travel the world or something like that. I'm trying to remember. Did he also enlist in the military? No, he was just having final moments with Gabriel before he went and decided what he wanted to do with his life. And Royal wanted to go to Chicago. So next thing you know, Royal died in Chicago over a gambling conflict with some street kids. So it's like, okay, Roy got in trouble. Roy got stabbed when he was with some people who he probably shouldn't have been with. Same thing happened to Royal, possibly with this gambling conflict. And then we got into John's relationship with his dad, with Gabriel, who was his father, and I saw it on this page 169 that went into like what John was probably feeling. Yeah, it said here, then he would no longer be the son of his father, but the son of his heavenly father, the king. Then he need no longer fear his father, or he could take it as it were their quarrel over his father's head to heaven, to the Father who loved him, who had come down in the flesh, and to die for him. Then he and his father will be equals in the sight and the sound and the love of God. Then his father could not beat him anymore, or despise him anymore, or mock him anymore. He, John, the Lord's anointed, he could speak to his father then as men spoke to one another, as sons spoke to their fathers, not in trembling but in sweet confidence, not in hatred but in love. His father could not cast him out, whom God had gathered in. Yet trembling, he knew that this was not what he wanted. He did not want to love his father. He wanted to hate him, to cherish that hatred, and give his hatred words one day. He did not want his father's kiss, not anymore. He who had received so many blows, he could not imagine on any day to come, and no matter how greatly he might be changed, wanting to take his father's hand. The storm had raged in him tonight could not uproot this hatred, the mightiest tree in all John's country, all that remained tonight in John's flood time. And then they talked about trauma in this section where it says, "Oh, but his thoughts were evil, but tonight he did not care. Somewhere in all this whirlwind, in the darkness of his heart, in the storm, was something he must find. He could not pray. His mind was like the sea itself, troubled and too deep for the bravest man's descent, throwing up now and again for the naked eye to wonder at. Treasure and debris long forgotten on the bottom, bones and jewels, fantastic shells, jelly that had once been flesh, pearls that had once been eyes, and he was at the mercy of the sea, hanging there with darkness all around him." And when Gabriel learned about Royal's death, he broke down, because we know that is his biological son, and Deborah still didn't confess to Deborah that Royal is his son with Esther. So Deborah, she see that he was broken down, and she was like wondering why he was breaking down. And she was like putting two and two together. And I think Deborah like already knew. But Deborah was asking him, "Is this your son?" And Gabriel was like, "Yes." And he was like, "How'd you figure that out?" And she's like, "You didn't even have to tell me. I could just tell by the way you raised him. I could just tell by the way we were having our conversations." Like, Deborah was on it. She knew that that Royal was his son, but she was like still disappointed in Gabriel that he wasn't honest and stuff like that. Like, Gabriel, one day you're gonna have to answer for all the troubles that you've been doing. Like, this isn't the way to go about life. So that was Gabriel's prayer. And the last semi-part of part 2 is titled Elizabeth's Prayer, which is John's mother. So Elizabeth had a strained relationship with her mother, and it seems like there was some colorism going around. I think Elizabeth is more darker complexion than her mom, so she and her mom had a strained relationship, and she was closer to her father. But even with that, her upbringing, it was still like tough, because eventually her mother died not too long after when she was growing up, and then her father just one day went away and wasn't taking responsibility. So she was raised by her aunt, and her aunt was the disciplinarian. She was like, "You better do your chores and all that stuff," and that is that authoritarian, black parenting. It caused for her to want to leave. Like, it was so emotionally draining for her to be in that environment dealing with her aunt. So she eventually grew up to a place where she grew up where she can take care of herself and then go away and stuff like that. So that's where she moved to New York. And this is when she met this man named Richard at a store. So she occasions this store. So Richard has been paying attention to her. So he expressed some romantic interest to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth was like, okay, open to it. And then I'm trying to remember what else happened. And Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just they went on and started dating and stuff like that. Like they went into all types of galleries, museums, and stuff like that. And Elizabeth was very impressed by Richard's intellect. Like he knows so many of the artifacts in the museums. He knows all about history and all that stuff. So he was a very smart man, even though he's not very religious. So even though he didn't, I think he also didn't have a good family upbringing. So he had to raise himself. So he had to grow up so fast and teach himself some things. And what was interesting about what Elizabeth asked, why you know so much? And Richard was like, I just, as long as I live, I want to know as much as possible so I can outsmart the white man. So she was very um, impressed by how he navigates the world. And then he eventually got arrested for an alleged robbery. He was falsely accused by the store owner. And if y'all seen the movie If Beale Street Could Talk, I feel like it was a lot of parallels between If Beale Street Could Talk and this part of the story. So maybe If Beale Street Could Talk was inspired by Baldwin's biological mother and his biological father. So yeah, he was falsely accused by stealing something from the store, and he even went even when they got into the identification room in the police department, in the police office, the store owner, he pointed Richard as one of the robbers, knowing good and well Richard wasn't one of the robbers. Like the actual robbers would just happen to run by Richard, and Richard was approached by the police and he got arrested. But Richard, it's like the system, yes, we know the American um legal system. Richard still has been going through the process and had to stay in jail for much longer. But he was eventually freed from court because the evidence shows that there was no way Richard was involved in the robbery. So he eventually went home, and then he and Elizabeth slept together and stuff like that. And yeah, they eventually yeah, Elizabeth was actually pregnant. Like actually, like right before he got falsely accused of robbery, Elizabeth was pregnant with John. So she was possibly 7 months pregnant when all of this happened. And she didn't even tell him because she was, nervous how he's going to react and all that stuff. But I think Richard, he would definitely be okay with raising the child and stuff like that. Because he's just not your typical man, clearly. But as you could see, so what happened to Richard, he was still processing all the trauma that was going through while he was in jail. Like he was abused by the officers and stuff like that. Like he had wounds and stuff like that. When Elizabeth has been visiting him in the police office, she see bruises and scars and all that stuff. I don't think she saw any bleeding or something like that, but she can tell like he was abused and beaten by the police officers there. So he was kind of like tired and over it, and then he eventually committed suicide by, I don't think I want to talk about it because I would say trigger content warning. There was suicide that happened and he died. So Elizabeth, she was had to eventually become a single mother when she became pregnant, when she gave birth to John. And then Elizabeth eventually met Aunt Florence when they were working together as cleaning ladies. And they were bonding over past lovers. Florence talked to her about Frank, and they were bonding about how men are interesting. And then they got really close. Like, Florence is a girl's girl. So Elizabeth eventually visited Florence with John, because it seems like she sees like Florence as someone who could be part of her village when taking care of John. And then Florence learned that Gabriel was gonna come visit after Deborah died. They didn't. I don't think they said how Deborah died, but she eventually died. And she's like, "This is the first time I'm seeing my brother since New York and stuff. Since we came to New York and stuff like that." And she was talking about men and stuff like that. And then Elizabeth got triggered over and then they were talking about men and stuff like that. Florence was talking to Elizabeth about how Elizabeth is still young. Like you could still you can still open yourself to love. And she was still mourning the death of Richard, which I can only imagine. Like, you gave birth and the father of your child is no longer with you, and we can understand why he decided to take his life. And Elizabeth eventually met Richard at Florence's, and she loved her son Gabriel. She was, he said all the right words and stuff like that. Like, he was very impressed on. They were very impressed with each other on their greeting. They eventually, as we know, they eventually established a relationship and eventually got married. And let me see. I think I saw some parts. So she said, what was interesting, I just love the way Baldwin writes. He writes, she felt a great commotion in the air around her, a great excitement, muted, waiting on the Lord, and the air seemed to tremble, as before a storm. A light seemed to hang, just above and all around them, about to burst into revelation, and the great crying, the great singing all around her, and the wind that gathered to fill the church. She did not hear her husband. And she thought of John as sitting, silent now and sleepy, far in the back of the church, watching with that wonder and that terror in his eyes. She did not raise her head. She wished to tarry yet a little longer, that God might speak to her. It had been before this very altar that she had come to kneel, so many years ago, to be forgiven. When the fall came and the air was dry and sharp and the wind high, she was always with Gabriel. Florence did not approve of this, and Florence said so often, but she never said more than this for the reason Elizabeth decided that she had no evil to report. It was only that she was not fond of her brother. But even had Florence been able to find a language unmistakable in which to convey her prophecies, Elizabeth could not have heeded her, because Gabriel had become her strength. Gabriel had become her strength. He watched over her and her baby as though it had become his calling. He was very good to John and played with him and bought him things as though John were his own. She knew that his wife had died childless and that he had always wanted a son. He was praying still. He told her that God would bless him with a son. She thought sometimes, lying on her bed alone and thinking of all his kindness, that perhaps John was that son, and that he would grow one day to comfort and bless them both. Then she thought how now she would embrace again the faith she had abandoned and walk again in the light from which with Richard she had so far fled. Sometimes, thinking of Gabriel, she remembered Richard, his voice, his breath, his arms, with a terrible pain, and then she felt herself shrinking from Gabriel's anticipated touch. But this shrinking she would not countenance. She told herself that it was foolish and sinful to look backward when her safety lay before her, like a hiding place hewn in the side of the mountain. So it's like all the puzzles just came together right in place for their relationship, because she feels like Elizabeth and John, because it seemed like Elizabeth and John is Gabriel's way of a second chance in having a family and being a family man, since Deborah and Royal died. So he feels like this is just another. He said this is God's calling of giving a second chance, of trying to redeem himself. And then Gabriel eventually proposed to her. He said all the right things. Like, I will make sure you are safe. I will make sure your son is safe. You will have nothing to worry about it. In the preacher way that he said and he put it. So that was the backstory of Elizabeth. So part 3, we came back to the current day, in which we pretty much see that Gabriel had a long prayer with Elisha and stuff like that. It was like he was giving a sermon, and eventually his family was there too, and they heard his prayer, and they were like praising Gabriel for his prayer and stuff like that. And then Gabriel was like, I will beat the sin out of you and stuff like that. And I think it's kind of insinuating that John was baptized in the evening service or something like that. And then there were church members that applauded him, and they were like, John can preach with the way he was praying and stuff like that. And Elizabeth got emotional over it, because she was like, this is my son. I raised him to just appreciate life and stuff like that. But here is where it gets juicy. So Florence and Gabriel started to talk again about just catching up on some things. So Florence revealed to Gabriel that she got a letter from Deborah about Royal and Esther. So Florence make it known, like, you might be a preacher, but I'm gonna remind you of the skeletons in your closet. So let me go to the page where it's like Giovanni's room, but this was a read that Deborah gave Gabriel. It's on page 251. Yeah. So, and Gabriel was trying to play coy, saying Deborah didn't never write. The word tell us to let the dead bury the dead. Why you want to go rummaging around back there, digging up things that what's all forgotten now? The Lord, he knows my life. He done forgive me a long time ago. And Florence said, look like you think the Lord's a man like you. You think you can fool him like you fool men, and you think he forgets like men? But God don't forget nothing, Gabriel. If your name's down there in the book, like you say, it's got all what you done right down there with it, and you're going to answer for it too. Then Gabriel said, I done answered already before my God. I ain't got to answer now in front of you. Then Florence said, I've been carrying this letter now for more than 30 years, and I've been wondering all that time if I'd ever talk to you about it. And then she said, yes, you didn't give her no bed of roses to sleep on, talk about Esther, did you? Poor, simple, ugly black girl, and you didn't treat that other one no better. Who you met, Gabriel, all your holy life long. You ain't made to drink a cup of sorrow, and you doing it still. You going to be doing it till the Lord puts you in your grave. And then Gabriel said, God's way ain't man's way. I've been doing the will of the Lord, and can't nobody sit in judgment on me but the Lord. The Lord called me out. He chose me, and I've been running with him ever since I made a start. You can't keep your eyes on all this foolishness here below, all this wickedness here below. You got to lift up your eyes to the hills and run from the destruction falling on the earth. You got to put your hand in Jesus' hand and go where he says go. And Florence said, and if you been but a stumbling block here below, if you done cause souls right and left to stumble and fall and lose their happiness and lose their souls, what then, prophet? What then? The Lord's anointed? Ain't no reckoning going to be called of you. What you going to say when the wagon comes? And then he says, the Lord, he sees the heart. He sees the heart. Florence said, yes, but I done read the Bible too, and it tells me you going to know the tree by its fruit. What fruit I seen from you if it ain't just been just sin and sorrow and shame? And then Gabriel said, you be careful how you talk to the Lord's anointed, because my life ain't in that letter. You don't know my life. And then Florence said, where is your life, Gabriel? Where is it? Ain't it all done gone for nothing? Where's your branches? Where's your fruit? And then he admitted, I got a son, and the Lord's going to raise him up. I know, the Lord has promised. His word is true. And then Florence said, that son, that Roy, you're going to weep for many an eternity before you see him crying in front of the altar like Johnny was crying tonight. Then he said, God sees the heart. He sees the heart. Florence said, well, he ought to see it. He made it, but don't nobody else see it, not even your own self. Let God see it. He sees it all right, and he don't say nothing. Then Gabriel said, he speaks. He speaks. All you got to do is listen. Florence said, I've been listening many a night time long, and he ain't never spoke to me. Gabriel said, he ain't never spoke because you ain't never wanted to hear. You just wanted him to tell you your way was right, and ain't no way to wait on me. Then Florence said, then tell me what he done said to you that you didn't want to hear. And there was silence again. Now they both watched John and Elisha. And then Florence here said, I'm going to tell you something, Gabriel. I know you thinking at the bottom of your heart that if you just make her and her bastard boy pay enough for her sin, your son won't have to pay for yours. But I'm going to let you do that. You done made enough folks pay for sin. It's time you started paying. Then Gabriel said, what you think you going to be able to do against me? Florence said, maybe. I ain't long for this world, but I got this letter, and I'm sure to going to give it to Elizabeth before I go, and if she don't want it, I'm going to find some way, I don't know how, to rise up and tell everybody about the blood the Lord's anointed is God on his hands. So Elizabeth didn't even know about Royal and Esther. And then Gabriel said, I done told you that's all done and finished. The Lord done give me a sign to make me know I've been forgiven. What good you think it's going to do to start talking about it now? Then Florence said, it'll make Elizabeth know that she ain't the only sinner in your holy house. And little Johnny there, he'll know he ain't the only bastard. Oh boy. And then he said, you ain't never changed. You still waiting to see my downfall. You just as wicked now as you was when you was young. Then Florence said, no, I ain't changed. You ain't changed neither. You still promising the Lord you're going to do better, and you think whatever you done already, whatever you're doing right at that minute don't count. Of all the men I ever know, you's the man who ought to be hoping the Bible's all a lie. Because if that trumpet ever sounds, you going to spend eternity talking. I'm sorry. Of all the men I ever knew, you's the man who ought to be hoping the Bible's all a lie is a bar. They had reached her corner. So yeah. Florence told Gabriel about himself. And then after that, John and Elisha, they started to walk to John's house together. And then John was just letting Elisha know that he would just love some reassurance that everything will be okay. And then Elisha said, like, God is in you and stuff like that. He's going to be with you as long as you do what you keep doing. God will always have you. And then Elisha gave John a forehead kiss. And that can speak for yourself, however you want to interpret that. So that was the end of that story. So I was watching some YouTube. I was watching some YouTube analysis. Like, I do wish there was more focus on like John. There was like a lot of focus on Gabriel, which I would say James Baldwin at that period of time, he just want to give a spoonful of like what made him become the person that he is. So this was like an ode. I would say this is like more of an ode to his aunt and his mom, because they really, like, his father opened the pathway for him to become a preacher and stuff like that. But his mom and his aunts really gave him that morality and that groundwork and foundation to be a critical person, treat um make emphasize on community and things of that sort. So yes, that is Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin, which I highly recommend. It'll probably be a lot as like a first Baldwin read because you had to get used to that cadence and that style where it's getting preachy and it's giving it describes the environment a lot because there's like a lot of details on like the environment, the movement of the characters, their emotions, and things of that sort, which that makes him a profound writer for doing all that. But yes, that is all I got. I really wanted to finish this book by the time Black August finished, and I finished it literally yesterday at the end of Black August. So I was able to get this video up, even though it's September. But yes, I got into this book because James Baldwin's birthday was August 2nd, and I just it's just he's just a wonderful talent. Like this is my fourth Baldwin read. I read Sonny's Blues, If Beale Street Could Talk, The Fire Next Time, Giovanni's Room. This is the fifth book actually I read in Giovanni's Room, and now I read Go Tell It on the Mountain, and I would say highly recommend. And yeah, stay tuned for another video, and I'm glad I'm finally get back into the rhythm of making videos for y'all because it's been a while since I got back into the swing of things. So I hope everyone takes care. I hope everyone enjoyed their summer, and stay tuned for some more videos because now that I'm done with school, I got more time to do some more reading. So y'all take care and y'all be blessed. Okay, and follow me at my Instagrams. Follow at Raisin Souls, and if depending on how you are, I'll let you follow my personal at Intellectual Albert. But yes, bye.